Yes, my name's Kai. This is the delectable ASUS ROG Ally X. Should you buy this going into 2025? Let's find out. Welcome to CaiLife. Yes, welcome to the channel and welcome to the video, whether you're a returning viewer or whether you are stumbling in on CaiLife looking at this lovely piece of hardware, the ASUS ROG Ally X. Bit of a mouthful when you say it like that. I love this thing, but we're gonna look at this and we're gonna look at the pros and cons and whether heading into 2025, this is a good purchase for you. Now, if you haven't already, please do consider dropping a like and a subscribe on the channel. It makes a huge difference. We're at around 900 subscribers now. I'd love to hit that 1,000, that four-figure milestone, and I can only do it with your help. So I'd massively appreciate it. If you're not already a subscriber over here, do hit that subscribe button. And remember, if you want to see more content, then hit that notification bell because that's going to tell you when new content is dropping like it's hot. Now, if you're watching this because you're considering a purchase of this, then do what I'm doing. Make yourself a nice mug of coffee or tea or drink of your choice. Yeah. Settle in and let's talk a little bit about the ROG Ally X. First things first, they don't look like this coming straight out of the box. Big props to, and I'm not sponsored by them, don't have any sponsors with anyone when it comes to this kind of hardware, but big props to dbrand because this is their handiwork. This case surrounding the ROG Ally X, complete with this kickstand, and this is the lid, the cover. So in terms of protection, you fold in the kickstand, this thing snaps onto the top like so, and you've got this lovely hard shell case that offers beautiful protection, and I especially love the grip that goes with this. There's a lovely grip around the back. So many owners have plumped for dbrand's cases, and they're beautiful. This one in particular, these stickers, these decals here on the side are actually glow in the dark, and dbrand send you a glow in the dark pen to activate the glow in the dark. It's completely unnecessary, but brilliant. I love it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on with this. Now, the Ally X is the third in the ASUS ROG Ally range. You had the original model, which is marked as the Z1, which is in relation to AMD's chip inside the hardware, and then ASUS released an updated model that used the Z1 Extreme chip. Now, if you're on the fence in between choosing this and the Z1 Extreme or the initial Z1, I will say something straight out of the gate. Don't go for the original Z1. It's now pretty outdated. Heading into 2025, it's not a good purchase. The Z1 Extreme, the model previous to this, is definitely worth your consideration, and we'll go into why that is, even though I am mostly going to be looking at advocating for the X. The Z1 Extreme certainly has its place. That shouldn't confuse you in terms of the chip that's inside the X, which is also the Z1 Extreme. So the way that we mark the difference really between the X and the Z1 Extreme is by the fact that the Ally X is called the Ally X, but make no mistake, it uses the same processor. So there hasn't been a huge bump in processing power and performance between the previous model, the ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme chip, and the ROG Ally X, which, as I say, uses the same chip. So what are we seeing in terms of differences between the previous model and the Ally X? Now, what are the key differences between the ASUS ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme chip and the ROG Ally X? For me, there are three big points. Now, for some users, there are two big points, and the third one is slightly less relevant. I don't agree, and let's go into why. So probably the most pertinent is that this has a much, much better battery. Now, the battery life in the ROG Ally Z1 is poor. And there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. Now, this could be relevant or irrelevant depending on your use case. A lot of people, even though this is a handheld device, now I play this, I'd say 98% in handheld mode, which kind of surprises me because with my Nintendo Switch, I would say that I use that 98% docked. But this is such a capable device played handheld. Although having said that, the amount of times that I'd say I play this without it being plugged into power is probably about 50-50. That still leaves a fairly big percentage, 50% a big percent for me, to want to have good battery life. And the Ally Z1 Extreme, the previous model to this, has half of the battery power. So you're really not going to get very much battery life, especially on more demanding games. Now, as I say, if you're at home or you're in a hotel or you're somewhere where you can get, even in a cafe, I love playing with this when I'm sat killing time in a cafe, having a coffee, just doing my own thing. I usually have access to power, in which case the battery life is slightly moot. But there are always going to be occasions, especially if you're looking to buy a handheld, where you want to have the option of not having to plug in, not necessarily having to lug around the power brick. With that, this offers double the battery life, an 80-watt battery, and it really does make a huge difference. It takes quite a lot to burn through that battery, and remember, with this, you've got different battery modes that you can select in the software. So you have turbo mode, which is the most draining mode. So plugged in, this thing will use 30 watts of power. When it's not plugged in, that turbo mode operates at 25 watts to save just a little bit of battery on the top end. You've then got performance mode, where the wattage drops to 17. And then you've got silent mode, where it drops further still to 13 watts. Now, obviously, that's going to give you less performance, but it is going to give you the most gains in terms of battery life if you're needing to preserve your power. So big advantage there. 80 watts of battery, it's a big boon. Next up comes the RAM. Now, the amount of memory in this compared to the previous model, the Z1 Extreme, it's a big bump, and it's not just the amount of memory, but it's also the type of memory. So the Z1 Extreme has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and this has 24. That is a significant jump. It's a big jump. And let me tell you, the X really, more often than not, is not having to make the most of that RAM bump, which is great in terms of going straight into the pros column in why this is a good machine to buy going into 2025. Because right now, most of the games that you play won't necessarily need to utilize all of that memory. Not only that, but the ROG Ally X uses LPDDR5X RAM. Now, that is different from the LPDDR5 RAM that's used in the previous model. And there are three key differences with that X on the end in the X. So first of all, the speed of that RAM, that X on the end, makes a big difference. The transfer rate, the data transfer rate of the RAM in here is at 8.533 gigabytes per second, compared to the non-X version of the RAM in the Z1 Extreme, which is at 6.4 gigabytes per second. Again, big jump. So not just the amount, not just that extra 8 gigabytes of RAM, but it's faster RAM. Secondly, the power efficiency is greater in the RAM used in the Ally X, especially at higher performance levels. And thirdly, it has lower latency. Now, those are three huge things: lower latency, better power efficiency, and faster. A key performance boost across three RAM metrics there. And I will temper this just by saying that's a big improvement. But remember, in terms of the processor, we're exactly the same. It's the Z1 Extreme chip in both this and what we're dubbing the Z1 Extreme model before the Ally X. Now, lastly, and this is the third one that for me is hugely important, but the ASUS ROG community have found a way, I think mostly to talk their way through why this is not so significant. Now, you can use micro SD cards in the Ally X, just as you could in the original Z1 and Z1 Extreme models. But as we all know, there was a huge issue with the previous two models and the way that the device was designed. And essentially, the SD drive itself would overheat. There was a problem with the transistor in the way that the models were designed, and it would basically burn out the slot, and if you had an SD card in there, it would burn out the SD card. Now, not for everyone, of course, some people managed to get away with it, but it was an inherent design flaw across the first two models that they have fixed for the X. Now, for me, that's significant. I'm not going to give a massive amount of praise to ASUS because it was a terrible design flaw in the first two models that they have just corrected. So it's not really a bonus, but it is an advantage that the X has over the previous two models. Now, a lot of people will say that it's easy to mod any of the ROG Allies, and that's true. It's not too difficult to take it apart and to insert an SSD. So you can upgrade your SSD, your inbuilt storage, up to, I think it is 8 terabytes. I don't think it's more than 4 terabytes, I think it's 8 terabytes. And that's, that's a lot of storage. For me, I don't have an interest in doing that right now. I don't want to take my device apart, but I do want to know that I can use some fast additional storage by way of SD cards that are super easy to swap out. So right now I've got a 512 gigabyte micro SD in here. There it is, lovely micro SD card. And I can basically just easily chop and change. So if I've got games stored across different SD cards, I know that I can just pop them in and out. For emulation, of course, we all know that these machines are ripe for the picking in terms of emulating your best retro consoles and not so retro consoles. And SD cards make a great way to be able to just chop and change between different emulators, different ROMs. Of course, if you own the original games. Now, the ASUS ROG Ally X runs off of Windows 11. Now, I have seen so many times in so many other videos and reviews of this machine that is something of a metaphorical stick to beat the ROG with. And I'm here to tell you that it running and being based on Windows is a feature and not a bug. It is a plus, it is a pro and not a con or a negative. And let me tell you why. First of all, the reason why it seems that most people frown on this being based on Windows is the idea of it being complicated to set up, complicated to maintain, and a little bit more complicated in terms of dialing in your settings to get peak performance out of your games. Now, all of those things are incorrect. I'm here to tell you that they're incorrect. The other fact is that I hear people say that they kind of find it underwhelming when they are greeted with the realization, either when they turn on the machine or when they land on the homing page. In fact, let's just turn on the machine. I think I've got it in hibernation right now. Look at the lovely LEDs. I know this means nothing. I know it's not an important thing, but I love the RGB lighting around the thumbsticks. I really do, and it's super customizable as well. Good point to say that that's something that does drain battery life, and you can basically customize it all the way to just turning off the RGB lights if you really want to save battery life. But who doesn't want pretty RGB lights around their thumbsticks? I do. This essentially is just a Windows desktop you're seeing right here. Now, don't let that sound like an underwhelming feature, because the other fact I hear is that people get underwhelmed when they get to the Windows homepage, when they're greeted with the Windows OS, and they just have this realization, oh, it's just Windows. This is just a small Windows machine. But I don't have that feeling when I turn on my Xbox. I don't when I get to the splash page, when I get to the homepage of my Xbox, go, oh, but it's just an Xbox. When I turn on my iPhone, I don't just go, oh, but it's just Apple OS. This is just an iPhone. So I'm not quite sure why people have that view when it comes to Windows in particular. It's not complicated. It's not a complex setup. It's super easy to set up. And in fact, there is another video on my channel, which is how to set up your new ROG Ally X. So check that out, because basically I'm espousing how easy this is to set up in terms of dialing it in and getting started with your games. So don't buy into the belief that this being built on Windows and built around Windows is something negative. It's not. It makes it, yes, super customizable, but only as customizable as you want to make it. You don't need to spend hours and hours dialing things in. When you start a game, you're not then suddenly delving into 3 hours of frame rates and changing RAM allocation and changing resolution and all of these things. Yes, you can do those things. And I mean, changing resolution takes about 2 seconds. And if you're not getting the desired results or the desired performance, you just change it back. But none of these things are overly technical. They don't need some sort of Windows expert. You don't need to be some sort of computer geek to understand and get the best out of this machine. This is still ostensibly a handheld console, and the fact that it runs on a full-fat version of Windows 11 is great. You're not being hampered by some sort of mobile version of Windows, which is pared down in the same way that, say, the iPad uses a mobile OS, essentially, but your MacBook or your iMac uses a full-fat Mac OS. And there are limitations. There aren't limitations in terms of the software here. You're getting the full benefit and full customization. So with that in mind, I can quite easily just put in my AirPod Pros and jump into a game of Fortnite, jump into a game of Warzone, and immediately just be on voice chat using my AirPod Pros, which just instantly connect to this device. That's just as seamless an experience as I'd expect if I was using something that was, say, had more the look software-wise of a straight-up console. Having said that, it does have very, very specific Ally X style software. That's absolutely fantastic. So ASUS have something called the Armory Crate. And the Armory Crate is essentially a glorified launcher for your games and your specific gaming software. There are 2 shortcut buttons on the Ally. So this one will open up your Armory Crate. And in the Armory Crate, you have everything from settings for the Ally itself, so performance settings, storage settings. You can do controller maps, and you can make control profiles specific to different games, which is great. That's all accessible within the games as well. So you can easily be running a game, change a control profile or performance-based data. You can't change the RAM allocation whilst you're in game. That does require a system restart, so that's good to know. And there are certain games, Call of Duty, Warzone, I'm looking at you, where you should not change your power profile whilst you are in game, because the anti-cheat software has been known to ban people for it. So don't do that. If you're going to do that, then restart the software first. You don't need to restart the device. But if you're going to change your power profile, so from turbo to performance to silent, all the other way around, if you're playing Call of Duty, if you're playing Warzone, then quit Warzone, change your power profile, then go back in. It's a bit tedious, but it risks you getting unfairly banned by the anti-cheat software. In the Armory Crate, I'll show you here, this isn't easy to navigate upside down, but this is what you'll tend to be greeted with. So I've got everything installed here, from the Epic launcher to Battle.net for playing Diablo 4. You've got, what else have you got on here? Steam, of course, Xbox, Game Pass, which we're gonna go into because that is a huge reason to buy one of these machines, and you can look at your individual games. If you don't want to actually open one of the main launchers, you can actually go just straight into one of the games by selecting one of those. So that feature is absolutely brilliant. And on the other side is a quick dock that opens on the side, and this dock is customizable, easy to just choose what you want in this list, but you can put anything in here. Anything I've put in here, being able to change resolution, your power profile, certain visual modes, so ones that make the screen more amenable to playing FPS, or if you want to have less blue light to the display, then you can make it so that you're playing so you can protect your eyes if you're playing late at night, etc, etc. And what you want to know is how well do games perform on this, and let me tell you, bloody amazingly, absolutely brilliant. Now, I had my reservations before I bought this. Like I say, I have a Switch, but I haven't owned a Steam Deck. I haven't owned any other kind of handheld. And I had my reservations before I bought this. I didn't have any illusions that going into this, I was buying something that could compete with my Xbox Series X. But I didn't expect it to perform as well as it does. And there are some key reasons why this does perform as well as it does. The screen, 120 Hertz with VRR. Now that is crucial. VR means variable refresh rate. Now that's something that the Steam Deck does not have. It's a reason why this does not have an OLED display. Now that might disappoint you. You might want the looks, the crispness of an OLED display, but you can't have variable refresh rate on an OLED display, or at least not yet. Now that is huge on this. Variable refresh rate might sound like some sort of complicated phrase, but it does exactly what it says on the tin. It means that the display can adjust and go through different refresh rates and keeps everything looking nice and smooth. Screen tearing is something that you do see if you plug in to an external monitor, which is good to know. But that's something that's very easy to do. Whether you're using a big display, you want to use your TV, you want to use a portable monitor. I've tried all of those things. This thing works brilliantly on all of them. The display is absolutely brilliant. The 120 Hertz is also superb. Again, I had my reservations about playing games like Warzone, like COD, like Rocket League, games where you need a fast screen, low latency. This thing works brilliantly. If you're worried about whether it can play super high-end AAA games, of course, it is not going to compete with your PS5, with your Xbox Series X, with your top-end desktop gaming PC. But that's not what it's here for. It's here to offer a extremely well-performing device that you can use on the go as well as at home. But having said that, it really does handle those top games really well. So Cyberpunk runs superbly on this. I've been playing the new Indiana Jones game on this, and I mean, it looks absolutely beautiful. The footage that I'm showing you right now, that's actually hooked up to my display card and my external monitor. So bear in mind that on this smaller screen, everything's gonna look better than if it's blown up huge, because obviously you're going to get more visible artifacts. But in terms of how this looks and how it runs, it's absolutely superb. I mean, I genuinely find it quite mind-boggling how well this thing performs. Now, a lot is made of the faff that's involved in setting up a Windows machine or setting this up to run games. And I'm telling you, I'm here to tell you, it's a load of old pants. Unless you've never downloaded any firmware or installed any software updates, this thing is an absolute breeze. When you set the thing up, first of all, it sets up like you're setting up a new PC, but it talks you through everything and you get to name your device. Once all those updates are installed, then you get to the Windows proper, and then the Armoury crate takes over and says, oh, we need to install these things. You install those things, and then Windows Update will kick in and say, oh yeah, we need to install these things. Within 1.5 or 2 hours, and well, basically I plugged it in, let it do its thing, it was ready to go. It's as simple as that. It doesn't need any extra tweaking apart from that. It's done. And that's not unlike unpacking your Series X or your PS5, where, you know, from factory settings, it will need a firmware update, it will need a software update, or when your games need to download an update. It's no different. So don't be fooled into thinking that because this runs on Windows and not Linux or Steam OS, that this is difficult to use. It really isn't. It's a doddle. You don't need to be an expert with computers. You don't need to be an expert with handhelds. It's really straightforward. And in terms of downloading the individual launchers, so the Epic Games launcher, the Battle.net launcher, it really is just a case of going to the website, using Edge or Google Chrome or whatever browser you want to use, and downloading it, because essentially this is a small desktop PC. The great thing is that it will automatically appear in your Armoury crate, so you don't need to download stuff and then drag it into here and try and get the inbuilt ROG Ally X software to recognize the software you're installing on the machine. There's perfect synergy between downloading gaming applicable things like that and then it incorporating into the software that is basically ready to go in terms of gaming. Of course, what you want to know and what you want to see is how well does it play those games. I have other videos on the channel which are performance tests, essentially, of various popular games that I love to play. So there are performance tests on Rocket League, the newly released ARPG Path of Exile 2, Call of Duty, both multiplayer and Warzone. We've got Stalker 2, which recently came out and again is a taxing piece of software, and Fortnite. And this thing handles all of those things like a champ. Now, some of those pieces of software, notably Call of Duty, either multiplayer or Warzone, Rocket League and Fortnite, are supremely well optimized pieces of software. They tend to work brilliantly on different bits of hardware. Having said that, it is an absolute joy to sit on my couch or to be in bed and to be able to play Fortnite at 120 FPS with no lag, no stuttering, no drop in frame rate, to be able to get VRs, to be able to win, to be competitive, not using an external controller. It's superb. It's absolutely superb. The controls on the X itself are improved from the Z1 Extreme, so there are lots of complaints about the quality of the thumbsticks, the D-pad, the buttons, the triggers as well. The Ally X has 2 back buttons as well, all of these fully customizable with the Armory Crate software. And like I say, the fact that I can be not just competitive, but get wins in my favorite games, which I would never expect, in all honesty, with this. Now, having come from the Nintendo Switch previously, and listen, if you've played games like Fortnite and Rocket League on the Switch, you know you're not in for really a good time. The quality of the game isn't great. The frame rates aren't great, the graphical fidelity isn't great. In fairness to the Switch is now an old machine. It's old hardware, this is new hardware, you'd expect an improvement. It still doesn't take away the fact that it is a bit of a marvel to have something that's so small and runs so well, it looks really great. Just a fantastic way to play your favorite games, old or new. And that's another point. You know, we have an exhaustive library of platform and 2D and side scrollers that just, you know, they work flawlessly on this, as you'd expect. But what you wouldn't expect is for newly released games like Indiana Jones, like Cyberpunk, like Stalker 2, to run so well on this. And they really, really do. They run supremely well. Both in terms of frame rate and graphical fidelity. Another thing to mention, and you'll hear this in my performance test videos because I let the sound run from the speakers, is that this thing does have really good speakers. Now, you'll hear other reviewers and people talking about both the Z1 Extreme and the Ally X in terms of how good the speakers are, and the speakers are very, very good. But let's be real, honestly, how often are we using the speakers on a device like this? Not very often. It's so easy for me to connect my headphones, either my AirPods or I connect my SteelSeries Arctis Nova Pros to them as well. You're not going to be really using the speakers very much. If you're in a public place and you're using the speakers, you're going to be, you know, public enemy number 1. If you're at home and no one's in, or it's no problem for you to use the speakers, the quality of the speakers is very good, sure. I'd recommend, just as I would have if you're getting the Z1 Extreme, that if you're going to get the X, to get a dock. Now, there are loads of third-party docks, this one that I've got has loads of connections on the back. I'm not sure if I'm too enamored. I'm not sure whether this is a prerequisite, but it's got a hard wired in USB-C that connects to the actual Ally. So you'll see how this sits. So the Ally can sit on the dock. This goes into the charging port, and it's a lovely right angle connection as well, which makes it look super, super clean. And then at the back, you'll plug in the power brick. It's got space for other USB devices. The Ally X has a second USB-C port at the top, which the Z1 Extreme doesn't have. It only has one USB-C. And that's significant because, you know, you might want to add anything from a dongle for a wireless keyboard and mouse to an external controller to maybe headphones. So like with my Arctis Nova Pros, you've got the dock for the Nova Pro where you can change the mixer settings or the EQ. So it's good to have all of these extra connections. And on top of that, it has an HDMI out and it has an Ethernet out as well, which is, again, a great thing, because if you're at home and you're gaming and you're connecting this to a bigger monitor and you want to have just the very best possible connection, you get an Ethernet on there, and that's as good as a wired internet connection. For me, it's useful having those extra connections because I know that if I'm at home and I really want to get the same performance that I have when I'm using my Xbox Series X, then I'll use this. I'll use my Razer Wolverine, and I absolutely love this pad. It's USB-C to USB-A, so I can plug this straight into the back of my dock, and then I can use this not only to navigate the device itself, but obviously also in games. And once again, it's super customizable once I'm in the games themselves. Now, that is a whole lot of hype from your boy about why you should get an ROG Ally X heading into 2025, but there are a fair few reasons to maybe stop you from clicking that purchase button heading into 2025. Now, the first one is the price. Now, the price of the ROG Ally X is steep compared to its predecessor, especially with recent prices. So in the run up to Black Friday, at least here in the UK, and in fact the same in the States and in Europe, there was a big price drop on the previous machine, the Ally Z1 Extreme, where it dropped to £400 over here in the UK, but I think the equivalent over in the States, I think it dropped to $400. And that was a significant drop. Now, that is half the price of the X. This sits at least in the UK, at between £750 and £800. That is a hefty amount of money. It's a lot of money. It's a significant investment compared to buying the Z1 Extreme. So big trade-off right there. It's a huge trade-off, and it's a tough one to choose between. It's one of those that if money is no object, if you've got the money and it's not a massive consideration, then if we're talking about reasons not to buy it, and we're talking about the price of the model, then go for the Ally X. If money is an issue for you, then it's definitely worth considering weighing up the two. Absolutely, for sure. The Z1 Extreme is a brilliant machine for £400. And remember, they run the same processor. The Z1 Extreme is in this model, and it's also the chip that's in the previous model. Remember, it's the RAM that's improved on this, and that does offer a significant boost. And it is worth saying that even though it may not offer a huge boost in every game right now when you compare the two models, there is a big argument that you are future-proofing yourself by purchasing this over the Z1 Extreme, because as more taxing and demanding and AAA games come out in the next 1 to 3 years at least, this will have much more chance of running those games at a decent frame rate, at a good resolution compared to the Z1 Extreme model. However, that brings us on to the next problem, and that is new releases and upgraded hardware, and 2025 is certainly going to bring those. Of course, with most hardware now, whether it's smartwatches, whether it's your mobile phone, whether it's your handheld console, there are almost yearly updates and new iterations annually. It seems like these consoles are going to be no different. Of course, we had the Ally X released this year, the Z1 Extreme models released in 2023, and we're certainly anticipating the new model and the upgraded model of the Z1 Extreme chip, the Z2, to come out in 2025. Now, whether or not that's going to be a successor to the Ally X is a different matter, and I'd wager almost certainly not. I'd expect an upgrade to the Ally X to come in 2026 rather than 2025. And at the moment, it's completely unknown how the update to the Z1 Extreme that was released in 2023 is going to compare to this that was released just this year. It's hard to know, but one thing's for sure is that it will almost certainly use the AMD Z2 chip. Whether it will have 24 gigabytes of RAM, I don't know. Will it have an 80-watt battery? I don't know. That is certainly a reason to, well, it's a con. It's a con of buying this. It's definitely a bug and not a feature. The flip side to this, and I'm certainly a believer in this aspect, is that if you are thinking, well, I can't buy one of these going into 2025 because in 6 to 8 months, there's going to be the model with the Z2 chip, then you will never buy a new piece of hardware, or you'll never buy the current piece of hardware, shall I say. You're always going to have an outdated model within the next 10 to 12 months. That's just how it works. You'd never buy a new iPhone, you'd never buy the current phone, whether it's an iPhone or a Samsung. You'd never buy the X because the next model's on the horizon. So there is a point where you have to park your anxiety in terms of, if I buy this, how soon will it be outdated? How soon will it be obsolete? I mean, look, the answer to that question is probably within the next 12 months. But the thing is, this model isn't going to be obsolete. It might be outdated in terms of, yes, something new and shiny is going to come out in 2025, and there's no doubt about that. Not just from ASUS, but also we know that the new Legion Go is coming out It is coming out sometime soon, and the specs look impressive. That's certainly going to be a rival to this machine. There's no doubt about that, because right now, in terms of what's on the market, this is the big boy, this is the beast, this is the most powerful piece of machinery you can get. But that might not be the case within the next 3 months or so. But right now, if you're buying a model right now, you're purchasing it right now, buy the X. If you're literally like, I've got this money, I can afford the X, and I want to buy the most powerful handheld that there is right now, that's probably going to see me comfortably through the next 1 to 3 years at least, buy the X, buy the ROG Ally X. There's no doubt about that. It's great on the go, it's got strong battery life. That 80-watt battery is an absolute beast. It runs everything I've thrown at it so far. Are there going to be games that you're going to need to compromise on? Absolutely. But there's brilliant software in this, like the AFMF, so fluid motion frames. It uses software to fill in the gaps, essentially. So when there are frame rate drops, or if you're looking for additional frames, there is software that makes up those lost frames and keeps everything running nice and fluid. It's a brilliant piece of software. There's also a software mode in this where essentially you can use a lower resolution, so you can run it at 720p or 900p instead of 1080, but then software will upscale it, but keep the frame rate high. What more could you want? It means that you can run those games like Indiana Jones, like Cyberpunk, like Stalker 2, and you can still have a beautiful looking game on this screen running at a really, really good frame rate and not feel like you're compromising on performance. And I mean, that's fantastic. But once again, I will say, if you don't have that money burning a hole in your pocket and you're not like, I need to buy one right now, and you feel like you can exercise some patience, then sure, having some patience, I think maybe for the next 2 to 3 months and seeing what rivals bring out in terms of the power of the hardware. It's not necessarily a bad idea for sure. If you're even more patient and you don't want this right now, then see what ASUS bring out with their Z2 chip at some point in 2025, but we have no speculative release date for those pieces of hardware. It would be at that point where I say that if you're watching this video, then you probably don't have the patience, or I should flip it on its head, more you're excited to jump into this field now. In which case I'd say, just get this now. And then if you're anxious about the idea that something better might come out, when that comes out, just sell this and then put that money towards the next thing. But look, it might not hold exactly the same value as when you bought it, but it's gonna hold a significant percentage of its value. And remember, this was released midway through 2024, so buying this in 2025 isn't like you're buying some sort of archaic piece of gaming architecture. This is still state of the art in terms of what is available to purchase today. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope this has made your decision in terms of whether to buy the ASUS ROG Ally X in 2025 a little bit easier. If it hasn't, or you've still got questions, then whack them down in the comments, because I love talking to you guys in the comments, and genuinely, I'm here to help. I get really excited talking about tech, especially gaming tech. So if you've got any questions, if you want to see more performance tests, or you want any more information on this beautiful rectangular beast of a handheld console, then hit me with it. And like I say, if you haven't already, please do drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to get up to date, if you want to know when I'm smashing that content down onto the metaphorical table of content joy, God, I'm talking nonsense, then hit that alarm bell, hit that notification bell, because you know that's going to tell you as soon as new content is dropped on the channel. But until next time, my friends, I've been Kai, this is CaiLife. Thank you so much for watching, and peace out.